Thanks, Tim, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to present today. We mentioned weather at the start of the session today. It actually snowed and we had sleet today, so quite a different weather setup here. But what I want to talk to you today about is Botanix Pharmaceuticals. We're ASX listed. The code is BOT, as was mentioned. We're focused on the development of a range of novel dermatology products, so products that treat the skin. I'm based here in the Philadelphia area, been in the US for about 10 years. My background very quickly has been in developing products through the FDA approval process. We've taken 5 products through FDA approval and launched them in both the US and different markets around the world. And as we'll kind of see in the presentation today, we're addressing very interesting markets where they have a lot of unmet needs, despite the fact that we kind of have many of these common skin diseases ourselves. And we've got a very mature pipeline. And obviously to have developed that pipeline, we've raised capital from the market over the time. We've been very, a good steward of that. We've got about $17 million in the bank, and that's more than enough to kind of fund the operations that we have planned and the upcoming study. So Tim, if you just advance the next slide, it's just a summary of the business. Starting at the top, we work in some of the common areas that we all recognize. So many of us have had acne, we have kids that have a dermatitis. Potentially we've also been exposed to different sorts of bacterial infections over our lives. When you go and see a dermatologist, the first line therapy that they often prescribe is something that is a cream or a gel. Why? Because they're often safer than tablets and injectables, and the patient much prefers those creams and gels to injections and other forms of delivery. We do have a unique technology to deliver drug into the skin that I'm not going to spend any time on today, but you can kind of hit our website for that. And that allows us to deliver these drugs in a much more elegant fashion and to drive a lot of drug into the skin where it's required. I'll talk a little bit about some of the markets that we're targeting, but really one of the surprising things is there actually haven't been any new products approved with a new mechanism of action in both acne and rosacea for more than 25 years. And that's pretty surprising because for most of the therapeutic areas that you can think of, things like cancer and pain, there's kind of products that are approved on a yearly, or a bi-yearly basis. So there's a lot of unmet needs and lots of opportunities, and that's why we're playing in those areas. In addition to myself, our team is largely US-based. Our president and executive chairman is a guy by the name of Vince Ippolito. His most recent company, Anacor, where he was the head of commercial there, they sold that to Pfizer for $5 billion. And his company before that, they sold Medicis to Valiant for about $2.2 billion. And the team here is very experienced in this pharma space, particularly with taking dermatology products through to patients, but also transacting companies as well. As we'll see from the pipeline in just a minute, we've got a number of things that are happening, particularly within the next 6 to 9 months. So a number of clinical studies that we started last year are coming to their conclusion. And in the pharmaceutical world, they're very big value inflection points. We kind of gain our value through delivering data and progressing products towards FDA approval and ultimately generating revenue. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those opportunities in just a moment. Thanks, Tim. So looking just very quickly at our pipeline. So we divide our pipeline up into 2 different categories. In the purple there are our bacterial focused products dealing with infection, and in the orange are our dermatology projects. And you'll see from the purple at the top, we announced positive data from a phase 2 study that we ran just last year, and we're actually just about to start another human study targeting infections in humans, particularly with at-risk immune systems who are undergoing hemodialysis. And I'll spend some time talking about that particular application. The other study that we have very far advanced and is almost completed enrollment is in the treatment of rosacea. I'll take you through some of the study outlines for that. That's going to finish its enrollment in the middle of this year. And then we also have a acne study that we're planning to take into phase 3 off the back of phase 2 that we ran across the US and Australia. And I won't be focusing on that today. Coming up within the next month or so, we will be announcing data from a dermatitis study that we've been running in canines in Australia. And kind of the common theme or the underlying drug behind all of these products is based on what is a natural product called CBD or cannabidiol. And I'll talk a little bit about that drug in just a moment and kind of why we think it's really appropriate for dermatology applications. And really the final thing for us on this slide is we have a number of other opportunities in the dermatology space that we're beginning to explore. As we'll see from the market opportunity in a moment, these are really significant markets which have not a lot of new innovation in them. And so as a result, if you can find something that's kind of well proven is safe and you can take that through clinical development reasonably quickly, there's good revenue opportunities to be had there. And then obviously to continue that pipeline is really one of our focuses over the coming year. So Tim, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the market opportunity for some of these products. And I should point out that we're focused on developing products that you would get from a physician. So these are not things that you would go into a chemist and buy over the counter. These are things that are prescribed by a doctor. They're kind of prescription strength. And in many cases, they're dealing with the moderate to severe end of these diseases. And kind of what might surprise you from some of the figures here, particularly say with atopic dermatitis, is every year there's about $17 billion of sales of these sorts of products. Now they range, of course, from the kind of the topical creams through to some of the injectable monoclonal antibodies, but it gives you an idea of the patient population in the US alone of about 75 million patients who have atopic dermatitis. With acne, it's a significant market as well, about 50 million patients and about $5 billion in sales. And as I mentioned before, in both rosacea and acne, there's been nothing new approved in about 25 years. So all we've seen approved are kind of new formulations of old drugs. And so as a result, dermatologists are drastically looking for new products to treat patients with, often because some of those existing products have pretty significant side effects. If we advance to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the drug that we're working with. Many of you may be familiar with CBD or cannabidiol. So originally this chemical was identified in the cannabis plant. We use a fully synthetic version of this drug because it is a drug. It's something that has an effect on a disease. And one of the very interesting things about CBD, particularly in the dermatology space, is that it's very safe. And in dermatology, it's kind of the reverse of many therapeutic areas where unless the drug is very safe, it won't be prescribed by physicians and in some cases won't be approved by the FDA. Contrast that with something like cancer or an oncology where I'm just about allowed to kill you if I can cure your cancer. Dermatology is not like that. I apply these things to the outside of my skin, often to my face, and so they can't cause redness or burning or stinging or peeling. So CBD is a very safe product, particularly when it's applied to the skin. The other really interesting thing about CBD is that it has both anti-inflammatory properties, it calms down inflammation, but it also has a tremendous impact on bacteria, particularly things like staph or golden staph, MRSA, which cause infections. And if you think about most dermatological diseases, acne, rosacea, and dermatitis, each of those individual indications have both an inflammatory component, you get redness, as well as an infection component. And so this is the first drug that we found, which actually does both things. So you don't need two products. And it's that safety and it's that efficacy with multiple mechanisms of action that we think is really exciting. And it's something that's been exciting the US and international dermatology community. And that's why we're developing it in these different indications. So I'm just going to talk about two of our products very quickly over the slide. Thanks, Tim. Starting with rosacea. So if you think of rosacea, you think of redness of the cheeks, you think of flushing, you kind of think of the English drunk with a big nose. And so that redness or flushing is caused by inflammation in the skin. And we're dealing with a particular type of rosacea, which is called papular-pustular rosacea. And it's really something that has acne-like lesions. these acne-like lesions break out, the redness comes, it's triggered by a range of different things. That could be environmental, that could be things like depression. And these particular lesions stay around. They can often cause scarring. And because they exist on your face, often in women over the age of 35, they can be very embarrassing and very intrusive. And so what we're looking to do here is to see whether our drug, which we call BTX 1702, that contains CBD, can have an effect on reducing these lesions and reducing the redness. So we actually kicked off a phase 1b/2 study. That's an efficacy study in Australia and New Zealand in the middle of last year. We're enrolling patients across about 15 different dermatology sites in New Zealand and Australia, recruiting patients who have moderate to severe papulopustular rosacea. We treat them for about 8 weeks, and we assess on a validated scale the extent to which we've been able to reduce their rosacea and the lesions that are associated with that. We do that against a placebo, or a vehicle, they call it, so a cream without the drug in it. When we're actually testing 2 different doses in this study. So for us, the readout of this study, we should have it fully enrolled in the middle of this year with data shortly thereafter. This will give us information to basically show that the drug works really well in rosacea. We've already kind of shown that in acne already, and it'll show us how to design our pivotal studies to get FDA approval in what, as we've seen, is a very significant market without any new drugs in a very long period of time. So that's an example of one of our dermatology products. It kind of forms the basis for that combination of the anti-inflammatory effect and the antibacterial effect as well. So I'll switch gears and talk a little bit about our antimicrobial platform on the next slide. Thanks, Tim. So I mentioned when I was talking about CBD that it is a very good antibiotic. It acts in a different way to many of the antibiotics that we have in the market today, but it's very effective at killing staph and golden staph, or MRSA. And so in looking at that property, we could apply that in many different ways. So we could kind of kill bacteria on the surface of the skin, things like school sores, or even things like diabetic wounds. But we've chosen to focus our first product applications in patients who are undergoing hemodialysis. So hemodialysis patients have to go in every week, 2 or 3 times a week, to hook themselves up to a machine that cleans their blood, because they're no longer able to do that. Because they're sitting in a chair, often in a strip mall in America with 7 or 8 other people undergoing that therapy. The way that the blood is cleaned is they have a catheter implanted in the middle of their chest. It's a big tube. The blood comes out of there, obviously, through the machine, gets cleaned up and goes back in. Unfortunately, if bacteria get into that tube, the tube is right next to the heart. And so that bacteria becomes no longer an external problem, but an internal bloodstream infection. And so what we're looking to do here is to actually remove the bacteria on the surface of the skin, and particularly in the nose of the patient, because about 1 in 3 of us just naturally carry staph and MRSA around in our nose every day. And so for a hemodialysis patient, that's particularly risky, because 20 to 40% of these patients don't die because they're undergoing hemodialysis. They die of an infection. So we've already done a study that we completed last year. As we mentioned, we treated 66 participants, looking to see whether over a very short period of time, about 5 days, we could actually eradicate all of the bacteria that are in their nose. And then we looked to see whether that eradication lasted for about another 3 weeks without any further treatment. And the good news was we were able to eradicate about 76% of patients' MRSA and staph in their nose. And that was very effective at killing those bacteria, and gives us confidence, obviously, going into this next study, that we're going to have a similar effect on these subjects who are subject to hemodialysis. So just to, Tim, if you wouldn't mind just advancing to the next slide, just a quick summary of kind of where we are and what's coming up from a milestone perspective in the next 6 to 9 months. So I mentioned the positive data that we just generated in our antimicrobial study. We're actually going to start another human study that'll kick off at the end of this quarter. And that will be a study that we run in Australia and New Zealand as well, looking over a 9-week period that we can remove these bacteria from subjects' noses who ultimately will be undergoing hemodialysis. Our rosacea studies you see there from the second bullet point will be fully enrolled by the middle of this year. We'll have data as soon thereafter as we can supply it. Very excited to deliver a new therapy into that area where there's been nothing in about 25 years. The acne study will follow our rosacea study. We're looking for some of those data from our rosacea study to inform the design of that. And then finally, our dermatitis study, which is our canine study, we should have enrolment completed by the end of this quarter and data very shortly thereafter in the second quarter of this year. So a number of clinical milestones. Final kind of point from me here, there are a number of other pipeline opportunities out there in the dermatology space, which are really interesting. We're at a time in the life cycle of dermatology companies where a lot of small to medium companies have been bought up. And so there are a number of product opportunities that we're looking at the moment, which we think are really attractive, that can potentially accelerate our commercialization pathway and kind of get to revenue a lot quicker than we otherwise would with the pipeline that we have at the moment. So a lot of news coming through, very excited about the opportunities and really addressing big markets with really novel products. Thanks, Tim.